So this is actually my eulogy for the Bauhaus, because in fact we were invited to the funeral. So of course he has died. The Bauhaus died. He died actually very recently. It was in the middle of all these celebrations of the 100-year birthday that is to come. Perhaps from the sheer number of events misrepresenting its history, manufacturing multiple legacies, it didn't stand a chance. Too many expectations, too much pressure to keep offering a sense of good design in a world that has changed so radically. Also that all these logos are all in black and white, so very kind of already, we knew that what was coming, right? So paradoxically, the Bauhaus was so influential, affecting so many different dimensions of the world that it was no longer able to offer any advice. The planet itself has become has become a Bauhaus product, and it's dying, something that we know already. Design magazines in the 70s, in the early 70s, were already telling us that with this Domus in Italy, early 70s, Earth, Calf, and designing for survival in AD from London. And what did we do in all these 50 years? Nothing. Add more stuff, more good design. Actually, Tupperware is in a way good design. You know, it's manufactured, it's colorful, people like it. The function is functional, it's self-purpose. But good design is now deadly, as this poor bird, right? That has eaten so much plastic that it has killed him. The birthday party has become a wake. Eulogies are usually about what really never was, about some idealized fantasy, a fiction, a projection, a shiny image it's manufactured to cover up the complications and the complexities, the strangeness, the eccentricities, the darkness, the crimes, a reassuring or tranquilizing story that we can all buy into and share. And share is, of course, very important these days. But how did the Bauhaus become the blank slate onto which so many fantasies could be projected? Perhaps because the Bauhaus has long been a ghost fiction. The eulogizing started even before the school closed. Despite the Bauhaus actually was never, and there is a succession of images that could demonstrate this to you, was never at all straightforward, despite the rhetoric of rationality, clarity, efficiency, smooth surfaces, etc. Bauhausers were engaged with everything that escaped rationality: sexuality, violence, exoteric philosophies, occultism, disease, the psyche, pharmacology, extraterrestrial life, artificial intelligence, chance, the primitive fetish, the animal, the plants. The Bauhaus, in fact, was a veritable cauldron of perversions. And my main point here is that the Bauhaus was actually a performance work, staged in a variety of media to great effect, an extreme performance that went viral and is still playing virally in the latest media, particularly social media. Just try it. Put hashtag Bauhaus, and immediately in whatever you are using, and immediately you get many more likes, many more hits, many more followers. So it is effective, right? It is not by chance that a performance stage was at the heart of the Bauhaus building and at the heart of every publication. The whole thing, one can argue, from the stage to the workshops, the teachers, the students, the curriculum, the costumes, the haircuts, the diets, the building, the graphics, the products, the books, was a form of theater. So it makes a lot of sense that we are doing this here. And my hypothesis is then that the crucial part of the shocking success of this ongoing performance was a set of experimental attitudes about sexuality, diet, breathing, animals, plants. And this is the side of the Bauhaus that is normally repressed, but was absolutely central to its success. In fact, the Bauhaus project to construct a new man, actively redesigning the human, has to be understood in terms of the deeper psychosexual and psychotechnical obsessions that underpin every aspect of the Bauhaus. The idea of constructing a new kind of normalized superhuman was not just a response to the trauma of war, whose shadow was always there at the Bauhaus, and we never talk so much about the war. The war is super important to understand the Bauhaus, but also driven by an experimentation with alternative understanding of the human body and the brain. It is important to remember that Gropius imagined that the culmination of the Bauhaus will be architecture as a synthesis of the art, technology, and experience. And architecture is almost always understood as having a normalizing function, establishing patterns that are stable, predictable, and to some extent standardized. The right angle is called the normal, actually, and it's very hard to find in nature. So how normal is that? The right angle, of course, belongs to culture, to architecture, and the idea of architecture is intimately associated with the idea of the normal. Perhaps architecture sees itself as the caretaker of the normal. So here is the caretaker of the normal. But the normal, what I'm trying to say, is not normal at all. It's a kind of artifact, always produced, never found. It is a construction involving a certain violence. And meanwhile, there is a hidden tradition of architecture of the transgressive, work that crosses the lines of the normal, complicating these lines, threatening the limit. In fact, transgression is not a small, eccentric, or thin chapter in the history of architecture, but a constant presence even in the work of the most orthodox or even the most conservative thinkers and designers of architecture. And I did this in the Haus de Culture, so I'm not going to take a lot of time, but you can see that the whole modern architecture is kind of a catalogue of perversions. And if there is no such a thing as modern architecture without transgression, what is remarkable about the Bauhaus, and perhaps the secret to its success, is the sheer density of transgressions of every kind. It was like a laboratory for inventing and intensifying perversions as a kind of pedagogical strategy. So my eulogy here is actually a celebration of the perversions of the Bauhaus, which have been repressed for too long, but in fact they were the source of its remarkable force. So let me do a quick catalogue of the perversions of the Bauhaus, starting with purging. In his preliminary course of the Bauhaus, Johannes Itten introduced a regime of purging. He was following the principles of the Dathnan religion. The idea was to rid the body of gross matter through enemas, fasting for 3 weeks, eating a diet of garlic-based mass, and using machines for pricking the skin. These are drawings from Paul Citroën, one of the students in the Bauhaus in those years, who also writes in his memoirs about how devastated they were all. And these are in 1922, he writes about this little machine. There was, among other things, he writes, a little needle machine with which we were to puncture our skins. Then the body will be rubbed with the same sharp oil which has served as a laxative. A few days later, all the pinpoints will break out in scabs and pustules. The oil had drawn the waste and impurities of the deeper skin layers to the surface. Now we were ready to be bandaged, but we must work hard, sweat, and then with continual fasting, the ulceration will dry out. At any rate, so the book said. In actuality, the puncture didn't go according to plan or desire. So for months afterwards, we will be tormented with itching. So for months, there are these wounds festering, and they are totally tormented. And then you can actually say, masochismo, anybody? Anyway, so let's move to occultismo. Because one of the intended effects of this items regime was a trance-like delirium offering access to a spiritual domain, reinforced by deep breathing exercises and concentration exercises that were run by Gertrude Grüner. Many of the masters, like Klee and Kandinsky, were also into different forms of occultism and spirituality. This is the son of Johannes Itten. Exoteric logic was not exoteric at all between the school. It was a kind of science. There was even a genre of spirit photography where Bauhaus objects like this Breuer slat chair is suspended in a cloud of ghosts, or in this Paul Citroën spirit seance of 1924. Anyway, next one, gender ambiguities. There was, this is actually amazing because there was more space for that kind of experimentation in the Bauhaus than there is now in our schools, right? There was continuous experimentation with the performance of gender at the Bauhaus. Gender inversions were, of course, the norm, famously women perform as men, but less famously men cross-dress, putting on lipstick and tie. I give you a tip. There is one of those four that is actually a man. And here is another party, and another celebrating the Bauhaus, and another man, Rudolf Lutz, in a woman's costume. But perhaps this will interest you, is Marcel Breuer car sent to Walter Gropius on the occasion of his 41st birthday, including a double image of himself, of Marcel Breuer, himself dressed as a woman, with the words, "My dear Walter, keep our little secret, our sweet secret, eternally and truly yours." Okay. So here is this image you have seen already, but for me it's unthinkable to bring the Bauhaus without thinking about the haircuts, which were used, of course, to embrace gender ambiguity, express modernity, and convey somehow otherworldliness. It's kind of interesting that it is Breuer and his harem, as we heard before. The Bauhaus students had to look like a Bauhaus student, which meant visualizing transgression. And one can do a catalog of all the Bauhaus haircuts and their evolution, and I did that with the students at Princeton last year. We did a whole catalog of all the different, because people will arrive at the Bauhaus with, women will arrive with flower dresses and long hair, and before we know, we have these haircuts, but the men also are interesting, so we did a whole catalog of the haircuts, and at the Floating University, in fact, we put a hairdresser to do haircuts of the Bauhaus to the visitors at the Floating University in September. This included, of course, savings entirely one's head, as when Item urged his followers, as Lothar Schreier remembers, when one day Item declared that hair was a sign of sin, his most enthusiastic disciples saved their heads completely, and thus we went around Weimar, and here is how he transformed from this to this, but also all the students that follow him did the same thing. Later, again, Marion ran in 1927, but again, she is one of the women that arrived with long hair and flower dresses, but then you can see her in this picture with a leather jacket. In fact, the leather Luftwaffe jackets used by fighter pilots, but also in Berlin, SM and lesbian clubs during this period, made its way into the Bauhaus as a symbol of cultural rebellion and sensuality in both men's and man's clothes. In fact, I think Gropius is one of the examples. Gropius wore black trousers, white shirt, a slim black bow tie, and a short, naturally colored leather jacket, which squeaked with its movement. His short mustache, trim figure, and swift movements gave him an air of a soldier, which is what he had been until recently. This is in the memoirs of Herbert Bayer. Chairs were also bound like corsets, as you can see in this way. You look closely in the photographs, there are all these leather straps and whips and strange things lying around inexplicably, suggesting something illicit. The visual restraint of the Bauhaus, in that sense, was not a form of abstinence. It was actually a restraint at or over the edge of pain. Extreme exertion. Under the excuse of gymnastics or trying to gain control of the unruly body, any opportunity to put the body in extreme position was taken. Sport in the Bauhaus was training the body for artistic work, but also to cure neurosis, war neurosis and collective neurosis. Item, by the way, that's interesting to me, has been a successful competitive gymnast before he came to the Bauhaus. He used to play soccer, track, and field, and he integrated the sports into his prep course as a means of physical control to release the mind. But after Item left, the flat roof of the housing for students in Dessau was also designed to exercise, and Hannes Meyer reintroduced physical education to combat what he called the proverbial collective a neurosis of the Bauhaus, the result of one-sided emphasis on brain work. Even during the parties, the Bauhausers had developed their own signature dance movements involving exaggerated rhythmic movements. Okay. Eroticism. For all the official commitment to artistic experimentation on the way towards the Bauhaus sober industrial design, there is a continuous erotic charge to the school. The beach, for example, was never simply the beach. Here it is. This is the house. Look at this drawing. It's supposedly illustrating this new house, the first model house that the Bauhaus had done. The house is so literal. Guess you missed the point. What? This is the introduction. And all kinds of other images that you find in which clearly they have an erotic charge. But the beach was one of these sites, for example, that was not simply the beach, it was yet another space for transgression and intimacy between teachers and between teachers and students and between genders. Naked bodies smoldering in the sun are tentatively photographed, 14 scantily clad men are happily holding each other intimately while performing a kind of feminized cabaret complete with the delicate raised legs and even a parasol. Right? It's all of this. It never ends. You can look into that and you keep going. Right? And then we go to the love affairs. Walter Gropius, for example, had a sexual relationship with one of the students who was a war widow while he was still married to Alma Mahler and having a steady mistress, Lily Hildebrand. Now, I'm not saying that to have a love affair is a perversion. What is perverse is that when Walter Gropius got tired of this war widow, he sent his mistress, Lily, to tell her that, well, maybe you shouldn't bother the master. So this is Lotte Besse, who, by the way, became later the chief architect in charge of the massive reconstruction of Rotterdam after the war. But Rotterdam was completely bombed out. And she is the architect of that. So he was a major thing. But it was the first Bauhaus student allowed to enter into the architecture workshop with Hannes Meyer, which, by the way, told her, you cannot do it. You cannot do architecture unless you associate yourself with a man, and she did exactly that. She had a love affair with Hannes Meyer. Here you have their photographs of both of them. Where Meyer had this affair with Besse. Besse was single, but he was married and with children. And when Meyer himself was named director, then Besse was asked to leave the Bauhaus because he wouldn't look good. Shops. After the preliminary course, all women were sent to the weaving workshops whether they like it or not. In fact, as Gertrude Arndt puts it, they all went to the weaving workshops whether they wanted or not. Yes, that was simply the way out. I never wanted to weave. It was absolutely not my aim. No, not at all. All those threads. I didn't want that. No, that was not my thing. Again, you have her not looking very happy at all. But my point here is that since weaving, and this is Otto Berger and others in the weaving workshop, but since weaving made the greatest profits apparently for the Bauhaus, we could ask if weaving was a workshop or a sweatshop, because women were sustaining the Bauhaus but were diminished between it. It was a transgressive school in many ways, but not at all in gender politics. Of course, we know that the weaving workshops became incubators of highly experimental work and theory, almost, I think, as a form of resistance. They were all stuck in the weaving workshop and they start producing amazing stuff. But the level of exploitation and restraint cannot be overlooked. As many people justify, they did great work there, so therefore what was wrong? No, there is a lot of things that were wrong. They were not allowed to do anything else other than weaving. Here you have all the weavers. And war. Gropius even actually theorized his discrimination in his inaugural lecture of the Bauhaus. The artistic impulse apparently was that of a man who has experienced the horror of the war rather than the dearest lady who remained at home. And he writes, the awakening of the whole man through trauma, lack, terror, hard life experience of love leads to authentic artistic expression. Dearest ladies, I do not underestimate the human achievement of those who remain at home during the war, but I believe that the lived experience of death to be all powerful. So it is a war that dominates the Bauhaus. Many students, in fact, arrive at the Bauhaus directly from military service. And Gropius himself was a casualty of war. He was injured and abandoned for several days in a bombed and ruined building. He later wrote, "First man must be constructed." This is what the Bauhaus attempted to do, to reconstruct these humans. Outfits likewise reflect this military background. Gropius, as we were saying before, went around with his military leather jacket, but extreme poverty led to the reconstruction of military uniforms to everyday outfits, including many gender-bending configurations. But the military never quite went away, and even the idea of a quasi-military uniform, including a whistle, put it. At first, people let themselves go. Boys had long hair, and girls had short skirts. No colors of stockings were worn, which was shocking and extravagant then. A Bauhaus garment was then designed. The Bauhaus whistle and the Bauhaus salute were invented. One was also cold and hungry for the sake of one's ideas. In short, there was a search for new ways of life, the fire of youth, most exciting living. I think we have to remember this. The majority of the students at the Bauhaus were hungry, right? They came hungry, and many of them signed because they could maybe assure that they will have a meal a day. But in conclusion, I wanted to say that the Bauhaus pedagogy and lifestyles took the human to the limit and beyond. Perversions were a doorway to an alternative version of the human out of an immense trauma. To celebrate the Bauhaus, we have to celebrate with all its kinks and perversions, its all too human weirdness. Then we have to say goodbye. Thank you.